Hey guys, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. So I just found myself home alone. Everyone's at soccer or sports, a little bit stormy. I don't have anything going on and I'm completely out of bread. So I decided today that I'm going to mix up a beer bread. So linked in the description of this live, I've got the beer bread recipe, the full tutorial. I've got links to everything you might need. So what I'm going to do is use the level 2 hydration recipe, but I'm going to replace the water with beer. You can use any beer you like. You can use anything. You can use a Guinness, you can use a dark beer, a light beer, whatever you want. Basically what you do is you find your favorite sourdough recipe and you replace it with beer. So if you go on the YouTube channel, like I said in the description of this live, everything you need is there. You will find the beer bread recipe, but basically pick a recipe that you like, pick one that's been working for you and use beer instead of water. That's what I'm going to do right now. So I always maintain 2 starters. I've always got 2 starters on the go. These ones are getting to the point where they need to be fed. I need 100 grams of starter, 350 grams of beer, 500 grams of flour, and 10 grams of salt. What I'm going to do is take 50 grams out of each of these 2 starters, and then after I'm done mixing up the bread, I'm going to refeed these starters. As I go, if you're watching, if you've got any questions, ask them in the comments. I can see them coming in, and we'll go through them. So first things first, let's get 100 grams of starter into our bowl. Now, you can mix in any bowl you like, but I do recommend that once you get to the bulk proofing phase, you use a clear, straight-sided container. So a container like this, what you want it to be is snug fitting to the size of your dough. So somewhere between 6 and 8 cups is the right size for bulk proofing a standard sourdough loaf. Most sourdough loaves are somewhere between 900 and 1,000 grams total once you add up the water, the flour, the salt, and the sourdough starter. And this size bowl is going to fit it quite well. But if you don't have that size specifically, you can use a bowl like this, right? So nice and snug fitting. You can use a round plastic bowl as long as it's straight-sided and clear so that you can see what the dough is doing during the bulk proofing phase. Now there was a part of me that used to mix in a mixing bowl and then transfer the dough into the bulk proofing containers after stretching and folding was done. But lately what I've been doing is mixing in the container that I'm going to bulk proof in, not because it's one less dish, which it is, which is awesome, but because between stretching and folding, I can put the lid on the container and it keeps all of my hydration in there. So let's just get started. I'm going to take 50 grams of starter from my 2 jars for 100 grams total. And if this is confusing, just let me know and I'm certainly happy to clarify what it is that I'm doing. Basically, the reason I'm taking starter from 2 different jars is because I always have 2 jars on the go and I would like to make some room to feed them both because it's been a little bit since they've been fed. So I've got 50 grams out of here. And then I'm just going to open this other starter jar and I'm going to pull 50 grams out of here for 100 grams total. So let's just get that in. There we go. And I just went a little over there, so I'm just gonna scoop a tiny bit out like this. And now, usually if you were doing the level 2 hydration recipe, you would be adding 350 grams of water. And like I said, in the baking playlist on the Sourdough for Beginners page, if you get in, the first video is a beginner bread recipe, which is low hydration. And then the second video is a level 2 hydration. So once you've mastered the processes, you're comfortable with what's going on, then we start to increase that hydration. Higher hydration gives you more bubbles in the inside of your bread, a crisper crust, but it's harder to work with. So now what I'm going to do is add 350 grams of beer. I'm just using Bud Light. It just happens to be what we have in the fridge all summer long. And I'm just going to pour it directly into my starter. So let's just go straight to 350 grams. So this is going to be 303. So I'm going to need just one more hand. Hold on for 1 sec. All right. So we'll pop this up to 350. So beer bread, the interesting thing is that by the time the bread has finished fermenting and has gone through all of the proofing process, once you bake it, you can't actually taste the beer. And I've actually shared this recipe quite a bit into the group, and lots of people have made it. This recipe is pretty popular on the YouTube page. Lots of people are using it. And most people are saying that the bread itself doesn't actually taste like beer. But what it does do is give the bread this like nice moistness and this nice like amazing flavor. So I'm just going to dissolve my starter into the beer. So I'm just going to use a whisk. You know, you might have a Danish dough whisk. In the description of this video, I've got the Amazon storefront there where we've got tons of tools for sourdough. We've got them all sort of sorted into different tool lists. So we've got, you know, the favorite ones that I use all the time. We've got some that are on sale. We've got some that are geared towards people who are starting to bake, you know, 8, 10, 12 loaves a day, and the cottage bakers. You know, we've got all kinds of stuff there. But any old whisk will do. All we're trying to do is just get our starter dissolved into our liquid. So that's pretty good. I think that I'm happy with that. So now what I'm going to do is add 500 grams of flour. When you're a beginner, we really recommend that you use all-purpose flour or bread flour. One, because they're more forgiving, but two, because they're way less expensive, right? So if you're still just learning and you're gonna waste a bunch of flour making some mistakes, just use the cheap flour, right? So I've just got like your most inexpensive original is another word for bleached, right? Like just basic all-purpose flour. If you want to add some nutrition or perhaps some flavor to your bread, as a beginner, I say go ahead and add up to, say, 20% of a sturdier flour. Sturdier flour would be a whole wheat flour or a spelt flour or a rye flour, an oat flour, an einkorn flour. Like there's lots that you can do, but don't go too much over 20%, because the higher the content of sturdy flour that you're using, the harder it is to work with. Super heavy flours like whole wheat and rye and everything else, they absorb more water. They haven't been processed as much as all-purpose has, right? So they're going to need more water. The more water you need in your recipe, the stickier it is, the harder it is to deal with. It also tends to bulk ferment differently. If you're really set and determined that you want to start it right from the get-go with 100% whole wheat or whatever it may be, in the baking playlist on YouTube, we've got a tutorial on that. But if you're not and you're okay with just using, you know, a basic flour to start with while you master the essential processes, while you know, get comfortable with working with sourdough, then that's what we recommend you do. So what I did was about 380 grams of all-purpose, and now I'm just topping up the difference to 500 grams with a good spelt flour. Spelt is our favorite additive. It has a really nice taste. It really adds like a really great flavor to the sourdough, but it's also easy to get and fairly inexpensive. I'll show you which one I'm using in just a second here. You can find it on Amazon. It's at Walmart. It's a fairly easy one to get. So I'm just using like your standard Bob's Red Mill organic spelt flour. So I just make sure that I have a total of 500 grams of flour altogether. Some of it's spelt, some of it's all-purpose. So now I'm just going to add 10 grams of salt to my mix. My kitty's in the background meowing at me. It's getting close to supper time, and everyone in the family always spoils him. So if you can hear him, just say hi to Theo. Hi, Theo, what you doing? Okay, so now we have our starter, our beer, and our flour, and our salt all in here. I've got a pretty nasty cut on my finger, so I'm just gonna use a glove to mix today. Just makes things a little bit easier for me without having to worry about getting stuff from my cut into the dough. So what are the essential processes? So whenever I do these lives, right, if you want, you know, step-by-step, day-by-day, really well-explained tutorials that you can sort of follow along with as you need them, then you definitely need to subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you just go on YouTube and search at Sourdough for Beginners, you're going to find it. We've got, you know, over 150 videos on there, basically everything you could ever want to know about sourdough. But we find that these lives are valuable because you can actually see the process as it's being done. But it tends to go quickly. Now, we have what we believe are a set of essential processes. So first things first, as soon as you start thinking about making sourdough, or you find it on social media, or you're wanting to learn about it, the first thing you're going to notice on the internet is that there are a million different ways to make sourdough, right? There are conflicting pieces of information. Somebody will tell you that you need to have a breathable lid on your starter, and somebody else will tell you, no, you should have a sealed lid. The reality is that whatever ends up working best for you is the right thing to do. And when you find that, when you figure out what it is that works best for you, you shouldn't change it. You should just stay with it and use that method. However, whatever works for you might not work perfectly for somebody else. The environment makes a huge difference. The ingredients make a huge difference. You know, the temperature, little tiny things like the temperature of the water that you use can make a huge difference in your bread. So what we've done is tried to streamline a set of basic essentials that if you follow them as a beginner, you should get to sourdough success. From there, you can start putting consideration into adding the more advanced processes or other processes that you see in an experimental way until you find what works for you perfectly. So what are our essential processes? Our essential processes are to have an active starter. So feed it before bed, mix with it in the morning, feed it early in the day, mix with it in the afternoon, whatever it may be. Have an active starter, dump that into your bowl, add your liquid, dissolve your starter into your liquid, add your flour and your salt all in one, and get it mixed up just like what I'm doing right now. So all I'm doing right now is just getting this starter beer in this case, but water would be the same. Starter liquid, flour, and salt to come together into what we would call a shaggy dough. So a shaggy dough is as well mixed as you can get it, but not perfect yet. And it's okay that it's a shaggy dough, because our next step in the essential process is to stretch and fold. So we let the dough rest for 30 minutes and then we stretch and fold it. And we repeat the 30 minutes rest and the stretch and fold a total of 4 times. Once you start to understand the science of sourdough, and once you're really comfortable with how sourdough works, you're going to be able to change what that stretch and fold looks like. For you, it might be only 3, or it might be 5, whatever it may be. But if you understand that with stretching and folding, what you're doing is building strength in the dough, getting the dough to really come together, the structures within the gluten to sort of, combine with themselves, then you can say as a beginner, all right, well, I'm just going to trust that if I do 4, I've most likely built enough strength. After the stretching and folding, we are going to bulk proof our dough. And this is by far the most important step when it comes to sourdough. So what you're going to do is get your dough. Well, you don't have to, but what we suggest is that you get your dough into a clear, straight-sided container like this. And when you're ready to bulk proof, mark the height of your dough. Doing that is going to let you see what's happening with your dough. What a lot of people don't is that sourdough doesn't rise like yeast bread does. If you put yeast in flour, it'll rise sort of uniformly in all directions. Sourdough doesn't do that. Sourdough spreads until it can't anymore and then goes upwards. So that's why this close-fitting container is really great, because the sourdough's first going to spread to fill in all the voids that you see here. So see how like on this side it's high, but over here it's low. The sourdough first is going to fill in all of those voids, and then once it's got nowhere else to fill, it's going to go up, right? So the bulk proofing process gets a lot easier when you're able to see what's happening with the dough. So that's why we recommend these clear straight-sided containers. And that suggestion tends to be fairly universal with sourdough. You are going to you should let your dough bulk proof until it is either 75% in growth if you're going to cold proof, or at least 100% doubled, or around 100% doubled if you're going to bake the same day, right? Now, again, there's lots of more scientific ways to figure that out. You can use temperature, you know what I mean? You can use all sorts of ways. You can use the aliquot method, lots of different things. But what we're saying is, as a beginner with a bunch of essential processes, if you generally follow these rules, you should come to a reasonable level of success with your bread. So, let your dough in your container rise to 75% if you're going to cold proof, 100% if you're going to bake the same day. After that's done, get your dough out of your container, pre-shape it, so that's no flour, no water. Just dump the dough out onto the counter. Use a straight-sided, usually it's a bench scraper, but use a tool to sort of gather the dough from this big sticky blob into a nice smooth ball. As you work around the dough, you're trying not to touch it with your hands. You're not adding flour, you're not adding water. You're trapping all sorts of beautiful air inside of that dough, and you're also reducing the stickiness. Let that dough rest, say, for 30 minutes or so, and then you're gonna do your final shape. So that's the point where you start getting flour spread out onto the counter, and you will do the various different shaping methods that you've seen in sourdough on the reels that you might watch or whatever it may be. So you might do the pamphlet fold where you fold the top third down and the bottom third up and roll it from the side. You might do all different kinds of folds, right? But at that point, you do your final shape. After your final shape, you have a couple of options. You can cold proof your dough in the fridge overnight, somewhere between 3 and 36 hours, or you can get straight to baking it. When you're ready to bake, right before you bake, you will do what we call a functional score. So a functional score is helping your dough to spring in the oven. So you've trapped, during the pre-shaping phase, you trapped all of this beautiful air inside of your dough, and then when you shaped it, you've trapped more air inside of this dough, and your dough is going to go into the oven, say about this tall, and as the heat builds up, you want a nice high heat in your oven, that air is going to sort of start to build pressure, and then it's going to want to burst. Well, that functional score that you've cut is going to allow that air to burst out of the bread, and that's what's going to cause that beautiful high oven spring that we're looking for in our sourdough. So what is a functional score? A functional score goes from one end to the other of the bread, or one side to the other of the bread. It's about 1/2 inch deep all the way across. That's going to give you an ear. Any other scoring after that is purely aesthetic. It's fun, it's great, you can make beautiful designs on your bread, and I encourage you to do so. But the reality is, you won't get good scoring until you're really comfortable with getting good bulk proofing. Your bread won't score well if all of the other things that lead up to that aren't working perfectly. Baking times can vary with sourdough. It really, really depends on what your oven's doing, how you're baking. You definitely don't need a Dutch oven. Dutch ovens make beautiful bread, and if you've got one, then go ahead and absolutely use it, but you don't need one. You can bake in a loaf pan, you can open bake. I would say open baking is the least forgiving of all the different types of baking that there is. If you are planning to open bake, if you really would like to open bake so that you can bake lots more loaves at a time, I highly suggest getting a pizza stone or a baking steel, just because they retain that high heat that sourdough needs. I would suggest start at 450 degrees Fahrenheit in your oven the whole time. Leave your lid on your Dutch oven for 30 minutes, take your lid off after 30 minutes, start using a thermometer, just your standard inexpensive meat thermometer, and start checking that temperature of the bread after 10 or 15 minutes. Cook your bread to 205 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're not using a Dutch oven, start checking your bread after 40 minutes or so, maybe less, right? From there, if your bread browns too quickly, then maybe you need to bring the temperature down to 440. If it's not browning up enough, maybe you need to put your temperature up to 475. You're gonna have to adjust and figure out what works best for your oven. Okay, so we have beer bread mix. So over the course of the next 2 hours, I am going to stretch and fold this dough. I actually happen to know that there's something about beer that causes the flour and salt and starter to break down quicker than water does, probably because beer is also fermented, so it's really accelerating the fermentation process. So I'm probably only going to need 3 stretch and folds in this. So I'm probably going to do my first stretch and fold around 20 or 25 after 7, 30 minutes later, one more, 30 minutes after that. Then I'm going to let this bulk proof. So that I don't end up all night tonight, I have a couple of options. I can use my bread proofing option on my oven, but not everybody has that. Another thing that I can do is if around 9 or 10 tonight I'm ready to go to bed and this hasn't finished bulk proofing yet, I can pause it in the fridge. So a fridge pause means the dough will continue to ferment in the fridge, but it will slow down significantly. I can stick the bread in the fridge overnight. In the morning, I can pull it out, stick it on the counter, and let it finish bulk proofing and carry on from there. For me tonight, probably what I'm going to do is use the bread proofing option on my oven, which the combination of the fermented beer in this as well as the bread proofing option, my bread will probably proof within 2.5 to 3 hours max. So that's what's going to happen with this. Tomorrow we'll bake it. If you're not already following the Facebook page, make sure you do. I always post, you know, the next day how the bread ends up looking. So now all I'm going to do is prep my starters to go back into the fridge. So these starters, I just want to give them another feed just to sort of build them up a bit. So as you can see, they're bubbly, they're healthy, right? But I just want to give these a quick small feed. So I'm probably not going to use these starters again until Sunday at the earliest, and it's Thursday now. So the likelihood is that I'm probably going to refeed these starters one more time before I use them again. So what I'm going to do is just give them a very small feed just to perk them up, just to keep them happy. So I'm going to give it 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. So I've got some water measured out, way too much water, but it's okay. So got my starter on the scale. I've tared it to 0. I'm going to put 50 grams of flour in here. So there's probably about 100 grams of starter in each of these jars, right? And so I'm actually feeding them way less than a 1:1:1 ratio. I'm actually feeding them like a 1 to 0.5 to 0.5 ratio. But the reason I'm doing this is just to sort of give them a little boost to keep them happy until I can bake with them on Sunday. On Saturday night, what I'll do is I'll probably pull them out, not discard them, and just feed them 50 grams each of flour and water again. And what that's going to do is perk them up, right? And then that's going to be, so tonight I'm feeding them 50 each flour and water, and then I'll feed them 50 each flour and water again on Saturday. That'll give me 200 grams to put into my bread. So on Sunday, I'll probably do 2 full batches, right? So a full batch of the level 2 hydration is 200 grams of starter, 1,000 grams of flour, 750 grams of water, and 20 grams of salt. I'll probably do 4 loaves altogether on Sunday. So on Saturday night, I'll just give these another feed to prep them. So I've got 50 grams of flour in my first starter. I'm going to tare this to 0. I'm going to add 50 grams of flour to this starter. So let's just get this in. By the way, if you're watching and you've got any questions, definitely let me know. I'm going to sign off in the next few minutes here after the starter's done being fed, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And definitely if you're needing sort of slower tutorials or to look at specific parts of the process, definitely go to the YouTube page. We've got each part of the process broken down into a specific things. We've got a stretching and folding video and a bulk proofing video and a pre-shaping video, step by step by step. So 50 grams of flour in each of these. I'm going to tare this scale back to 0. I'm going to pour 50 grams of water into my starter. If you don't have a scale, you would do half a cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water. Water weighs twice as much as flour, which means we always use half as much water as flour. So here, tare this scale back to 0. Get 50 grams of water in there. So all I'm going to do with these now is I'm going to stir them up really well. I'm going to leave them sitting on the counter until they peak, until they double, and then I'm going to stick them in the fridge at peak. Once they're at peak and they're in the fridge, just like anything else, is going to significantly slow down that fermentation process. It's going to hold them over until about Saturday. Saturday, I'll give them sort of a little booster feed, and then on Sunday, I'll do a big batch of bread. So I'll just show you. This is the consistency of my starter after it's been mixed, right? So let's just show you that. Not super thick, but pretty thick, right? Starters almost always want flour, if your starter's not rising, if your starter's not happy, if it's doing something weird, just give it more flour, right? They're hungry and what they're eating is the flour, right? So if you're not sure, when in doubt, give your starter more flour. And I mean, obviously that's really general, and I understand that when you're new to sourdough and you're really trying to understand something, that can sound confusing. If you want to know everything there is to know about starters, go on the YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist just for starters. One of the other playlists on the YouTube channel is just more lives like this one, just replayed so that you can watch them as they go. So here we go. So I'm just going to finish this and stir it down. All right, and maybe let's just get this in some water. There we go. So I've got my 2 starters refed. I'm going to pop their lids on them. I keep a tightly sealed lid, and that's going to prevent mold and fruit flies. As long as your jar is at least triple the size of the base of your starter, you don't have to worry about the lid popping. You don't have to worry about overflow. You can keep this sealed lid and keep fruit flies out. Catherine says, thank you. I've learned so much from your videos. I'm so glad. I love hearing it. So there you go. This was just a quick little impromptu live. We mixed up some beer bread. Tune into the page tomorrow. I'll show you guys how this ended up turning out. I can assure you that it will be delicious. If you've never made beer bread before and you happen to have any form of beer sitting in your fridge, and it really doesn't take much, like the last one I used, there was about this much in the can because I've got one going to drink. I had about this much left, and then I opened this one and this one's still nearly full. Give it a try. I think you're really gonna like it. So thanks for watching. I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. I'm really glad you're all here, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.